I can't let it go. Not after everything I did to have him. When Lucas decided to break up, I knew I needed to act, and quickly. Now tell me, would you fight for someone you love, even if it meant going to the limits of morality? When Lucas left me, a wave of despair washed over me. How could I let such a vibrant young man escape? He was everything I wanted and now everything I feared losing. Upon returning home, my heart was pounding, but my mind was already formulating a plan. The first thing I needed to do was make sure he didn't have a bright future without me. He had been my lover and my employee, and he knew how to use that advantage to my advantage. With the power I had as a businesswoman, I could easily shape the narrative. That night, sitting in my office, as the light from the screen illuminated my face, the idea of spreading rumors began to take shape. It would be simple. A little innuendo here, a rumor there. Everything would become true in no time. If he couldn't be with me anymore, then no one should want to be with him. Meanwhile, a growing fear settled in me. What if Lucas found out what I was doing? But at the same time, an internal voice told me that this was what I needed to do. I was willing to sacrifice everything to keep him close. And you? How far would you go to not lose someone you love? As the days went by, I began to see the effects of my plan. At work, whispered conversations in the hallways became more frequent. I made a point of being discreet, but the words I threw at Lucas seemed to grow and spread like wildfire. He was never a saint, and no one needed to know I was behind the gossip. Little by little, his image began to crumble. At that moment, a feeling of control came over me. The power I wielded over his career was intoxicating. I knew Lucas would have no choice but to come back to me. And even though he wasn't physically by my side, I already had him back, trapped in my web. But it wasn't enough. The obsession grew, and I needed more. He still avoided me, he didn't look for me. For him, maybe what he had done was just a phase, but for me, it was everything. Every step he took away from me was one step closer to losing control over him. So, I went further. I found a way to force the situation. I proposed a job opportunity to him, knowing he couldn't refuse. If he accepted, if he returned to my world, he would no longer have a choice. I would have the last word. But as I prepared my next move, a question began to arise. What if, deep down, was he really tired of me? What if this was all a game that only I was playing? With my every movement, it felt like reality was distorting. The pressure of keeping Lucas in my life began to take its toll in unexpected ways. He was no longer the young man full of dreams and hopes that I had known. Now he was just a piece in my puzzle, and I was determined to fit him back to where I wanted him. With the job offer I prepared, it was impossible for him to say no. He needed the stability I could provide, and I knew it. The smile she wore when calling him to a meeting was calculated, a mix of compassion and superiority. He looked at me, perhaps hesitantly, but accepted. I had won. But what have I really achieved? Shortly after our conversation, something curious happened. I realized that my obsession was consuming me. At some point, I no longer knew what I really wanted. Control had blinded me. I saw myself every day, adjusting my strategies, planning and controlling. But always with an empty hole inside me. Lucas's reaction was what I expected. He came back. But instead of feeling victory, something inside me began to question. What if I was simply replacing the emptiness with more pain? What if he really was just there out of necessity and not out of love? As he settled back into his position at the company, the feeling that I was on shaky ground wouldn't leave me. I wanted everything. I wanted his person and I wanted power. But how far could that take me? Time passed, and although Lucas was once again under my control, a part of me felt something was wrong. He didn't look at me the same way. The tension between us was palpable, and I knew he was beginning to notice the change. What once seemed like a fiery passion was now turning into something darker. I knew he saw me as a strong woman, a leader. But the truth was that my strength came from my fear of losing him. I watched him every day, trying to notice the signs, looking for something that would tell me he still really wanted me. But what I found was just distance. Something had broken between us. To try to regain his trust, I began to change my approach. Instead of being direct and controlling, I started to be softer, more understanding. However, this change in behavior seemed to have the opposite effect. The closer I got to him, the further he moved away. I was losing the only thing that made me feel alive. And then, as if the universe had conspired against me, one day he appeared with a closed expression, without the shine he had before. He told me he wanted to talk. My heart skipped a beat, but at the same time, something told me that the conversation wouldn't be what I expected. "I'm leaving," he said, calmly, almost coldly. "I need space." Those words were like a blow to the chest. I knew this wasn't what he needed. What he needed was me. But I couldn't let him go again. Not this time. Those words still echoed in my head. I need space. What did this mean to him? He was in my life because I put him there, and now he wanted out? That couldn't happen. I knew I couldn't lose control of him again. He had been mine, and I would do anything to make it that way again. Over the next few days, I couldn't think of anything else. Meetings at work, appointments, everything became irrelevant. The obsession with Lucas grew out of control, fueled by the idea that he was leaving me. I knew what I needed to do. He wouldn't leave, not as long as I could manipulate the situation. I started to intervene more in work decisions, creating an environment where he felt pressured. Instead of being the calm, sophisticated woman, I became the demanding, ruthless businesswoman. It wasn't just the job that was at stake, it was our relationship, and I wouldn't let it slip away. When I found myself alone in my office that afternoon, the phone rang. It was him. My heart raced, and before I could stop myself, my voice came out firm, almost possessive. "Lucas, we need to talk." He hesitated, but agreed to meet with me. I knew now was my chance to get the situation under control. When we met, he looked exhausted, as if the situation had consumed him. But I wouldn't give him room to decide anything. "You're not leaving," I said, my voice thick with authority. "We can fix this. Together." He didn't respond immediately. There was an internal struggle in his eyes. And I knew he wasn't sure what he wanted. But it didn't matter. I would make him understand that without me, he would be nothing. The silence between us was long, and each second seemed to drag on like an eternity. I watched Lucas, trying to decipher his emotions. He was tired, he looked confused, but also a little defeated. But there was something more there. He was on the verge of giving up on me, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I had control of the situation. Or at least I thought I had. That afternoon dragged on into the evening, but the conversation wasn't what I expected. Lucas was so different, so distant. When he finally spoke, his words cut through me like a sharp blade. "Sandra, I can't go on like this anymore. I'm not happy." That was like a punch in the gut. What did he mean by that? Was he walking out of my life again, even after everything I'd done for him, even after everything we'd done together? I wouldn't allow it. "You're confused, Lucas," I replied, trying to hide the fear that was beginning to rise within me. "I did everything for both of us. You have everything you need here. I can give you everything." He looked at me, once again with that blank stare, as if he was seeing through me, not at me. Something was broken between us, and I knew I couldn't fix it alone. But he would not accept defeat. Never. "I can't do it anymore, Sandra. It's not you. It's me," he said, standing up and picking up the bag he had left next to the chair. I stood there, motionless, trying to understand. I didn't know what else to do to keep him close. Everything I had tried so far was failing, and reality was beginning to creep into my mind. I was losing him. After that meeting, a feeling of helplessness came over me. He's gone. I knew he would come back, I knew I couldn't hold out for long. But as the days passed, the emptiness inside me became more painful. I had lost it, or at least, I thought I had. I needed to act, I needed to regain control. It was then that I decided to resort to one of my most powerful tactics, manipulation. I knew where he felt vulnerable. During the time we were together, I always explored his insecurities. I always made a point of being the person he trusted. Now, I would use those same insecurities against him. I couldn't let him get away. I started sending subtle messages, little things to remind him that he still owed me. Sometimes a simple, "I'm thinking of you," or a compliment disguised as kindness. But more than anything, I knew what he wanted most, a sense of security. I would make him believe that when he came back to me, he would have everything he wanted. But something started to change. The more I tried to pull him closer, the more he moved away. It was as if he had seen right through me, as if he knew exactly what I was doing. This made me question, was it really in my hands? Or was the only thing I was doing was making the situation worse? Then one night, he called me. His voice was calm, but I could feel the hesitation. I don't know what to do, Sandra. You've been manipulating me, and I can't go on like this anymore. This isn't love, it's just control. I don't want this anymore. Those words hit me like lightning. I had crossed a line that I could never return from. He knew. He knew everything. And for the first time, I realized that perhaps what I was seeking was more destructive to me than to him. I was paralyzed. His words kept echoing in my head, like a repeated and cruel mantra. He knew what I was doing, he knew my intentions. For a moment, the image of absolute control I had cultivated crumbled before me. It was like he had finally seen me. As if I were taking off a mask I had worn for so long. I knew I needed to stay calm, not show weakness. But the truth is, at that moment, I felt like I was losing everything. What would I do without him? What would I do if he really left? The thought of being rejected again was unbearable. But I couldn't let him see that. "Lucas, please don't say that," I said, my voice softer than I would have liked. "I'm not trying to control you. I just want us to be okay, like before. I know I hurt you, but I can change. Just give me one more chance." He hesitated, as if in a dilemma. His voice shook as he replied, "Sandra, it's not just that. I can't live like this anymore. I need something more. Something healthy. And this isn't healthy." I felt a growing pressure in my chest. He was moving away. He wasn't just pulling away from me physically, but emotionally. And that was the worst kind of distance. The one I couldn't handle. "I'll let you go, but know that you'll never find someone like me," I said, trying to maintain my composure, but deep down, I knew I was losing the battle. He didn't respond. It just hung up. I was alone, in the silence of my office. What had I done? Not only had I pushed him away, but now he really didn't want anything to do with me anymore. The control I cherished turned to despair. I was alone again. The silence at that moment was almost unbearable. I found myself lost in a sea of thoughts, trying to understand where I had failed. How did I get to this point? When Lucas hung up, everything around me seemed to stop. The office, the dim light that illuminated my desk, the stacks of papers, none of that mattered anymore. I was alone and, for the first time, completely vulnerable. As the days went by, despair began to take over. The calls, the messages, they were all ignored, and my pride, the one I had always carried so tightly, was shattered. I didn't know how to act anymore. Each attempt to regain his attention was like a grain of sand being swept away by the current. Everything was slipping out of my hands, and I couldn't allow it. I wouldn't allow it. That's when I started investigating. I knew Lucas had walked away from me, but he wasn't alone. There was someone in his life, a new woman. I knew her by sight, but I never imagined he could get involved with her. She was young, beautiful, and, it seemed, the answer to all the things I couldn't be for him. It consumed me. I thought about how I could manipulate her, push her away, make Lucas see that he needed me. That I was the only one who could satisfy his needs. But before acting, I needed to know more about this woman. I went to the company, where Lucas still worked, and started to observe. His every move, every word he exchanged with her, made me more furious and determined. They were starting to form something I could no longer control. But that didn't mean I was ready to give up. I had it in my hands once, and now I would do it all over again to keep it. What bothered me most wasn't the woman herself, but the fact that Lucas seemed so comfortable with her. I, who had always been the woman who controlled everything around me, was now losing control in a way I never imagined possible. The pain I felt when I saw him smiling at her, exchanging complicit glances. It was like a blow to my ego. I couldn't accept that. He had no right to replace me, not after everything I'd done for him, not after everything I was willing to do. I spent the next few weeks devising a way to push her away. Every little gesture he made towards her was a reminder that I had lost control. And that made me act thoughtlessly. I knew what he feared most: public humiliation, loss of respect at work. And that's what I decided to use against him. With my position as a businesswoman, I had influence over a lot of people, and I knew I could pull strings to put Lucas in an uncomfortable position. I started with small provocations. Discreet rumors about his work, insinuating that he was untrustworthy, that perhaps he was letting his personal life affect his performance. Little by little, these rumors began to spread throughout the company. I was doing what needed to be done, forcing Lucas to lower himself, to come back to me, to apologize. He knew that without my help, he would have no future. I would make him understand that he owed me, that I was the one in control. If he wanted to have a prosperous career again, he had no choice but to give in. What I didn't expect was that, in the end, Lucas would take an action that I never imagined. He confronted me in a cold and calculating way. I was no longer acting like the vulnerable man I knew. He was acting like someone who finally understood that he could survive without me. And that, more than anything else, devastated me. When you feel like you're losing the fight, have you noticed that sometimes? Is it because you are fighting the wrong person? How do you deal with the feeling of having been surpassed? Comment where you're watching and subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories about obsession and betrayal.